First, welcome everybody to the Eagle River Nature Center online. Our main building remains closed to the public. We're hoping for an early summer opening, but your public trails remain open and in great condition 24/7, 365. Things are probably are a little bit icy right now, so if you do head out, bring some ice grippers. It's maybe not the best for cross-country skiing right now as we're kind of in this early spring whatever ick that we're experiencing here. But definitely take the chance to get out there. A lot of our spring migratory birds are coming back. I've heard a rumor that there might be some swans up by the Albert Loop right now. So it's a good time to get out. And and the light is coming back, and like Irene says, we're all starting to have more energy. But with that, if you are not from South Central Alaska, we are located in Eagle River, Alaska. We are within Chugach State Park, which is one of the largest state parks in the country. And we've been trying to bring at least one Zoom lecture to you a week. And we're super excited today to have Beth Baker talking about butterflies. Just before we get into it, some housekeeping things. If you are somebody who's newer to Zoom and you just want to be seeing Beth, our presenter, or the active speaker and the screen, in the upper right-hand corner, there is a screen or a button that says View, and you can always switch it to side-by-side speaker or even standard rather than gallery, which is where you get the kind of Brady Bunch view of all of us. So you don't even have to look at us if you don't want to. As we're going through today, we're going to be saving questions until the end, and we're only going to be using questions using that chat feature, which actually pops up, and if you can't find it, it should be in the bottom. As we're going, if you do have a burning question and you're worried you're going to forget it, feel free to type it in. Maybe there's going to be an amazing butterfly expert in the audience who can answer it for you, but if not, at the end, we'll go through and we'll quiz Beth on what she knows as we do it. One other exciting thing going on at the Eagle River Nature Center is we are celebrating 25 years of being friends of Eagle River Nature Center. And so as we move on, as we move forward, look for some special events. We're starting to get some cool things planned. And if you are a long-term volunteer or board member, don't worry. We'll be tapping you in too. As we go, we've been able to keep our doors open by your generosity. Oops, and I'm trying to copy a link. And if you feel so motivated to help support more programs like this and keep all of our great work going, oops, just sent that to everybody in the waiting room, which is not what I meant to be. Feel free to check us out at ernc.org and to check out some of our archived programs, our past programs. Oops, I'm trying to do too many things at once, friends, so thank you for being patient. At ernc.org, underneath our public programs, there is an archived programs tab. And here's where you can find links to all of our past programs. One final thing before we get started is Beth is going to make reference to a butterfly list compiled by my predecessor's predecessor at the Nature Center, Carol Lloyd, who's an amazing woman, and I'm so lucky to be standing ultimately on her shoulders and continuing the great work that she's done. It will be on the website early this next week, and I'm going to put it as a file in the chat box that you're welcome to download. I just wasn't able to get it on the website prior to today's presentation. With that, though, thank you for everybody who's joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Beth.
Well, good. Thank you, Samantha, and thank you for doing this. And it'll let me do it in this format. So if people don't mind a smaller slide, I guess. Sorry. Anyway, so Butterfly 101 has been a great topic to review. Some of you may have read the book, kind of controversial book named Alita, but the author of that book was actually an expert on blue butterflies, and he wrote a quote that said, "It is astonishing how few ordinary people notice butterflies," and well, now let me advance. Oh, good. But Carol Lloyd was not an ordinary person. She was one of the co-founders of Eagle River Nature Center 25 years ago. And she basically loved insects and shared that love with others, especially children. She especially loved butterflies. And if you ever get to the Nature Center, they're going to maybe hopefully open in June, depending on COVID. You can see her great collection of butterflies at Eagle River Nature Center. And Samantha's going to put her list of butterflies on the website. So this talk is really dedicated to Carol Lloyd's memory. What a wonderful woman she was. The outline for the talk today is that I'm going to talk about, first of all, kind of what is a butterfly. And I'm going to talk about the life stages of butterflies, the 4 stages, then go on to some survival strategies, talk a little bit about a few butterflies that you're likely to see here pretty soon, and finally, how you can help butterflies. I'm going to start by what is a butterfly and how did it get its name? Well, it's not exactly flying butter. How did it come up with butterfly? What is the association? And the word butterfly actually comes from an Old English word, butterfluge. I'm sure I didn't pronounce that too well. My Old English isn't so good. But it is thought that there is this butterfly in England called the brimstone, and the males had a wing color that was like butter. And so the people called this flying insect a butter-colored fly. And so then it got shortened to just butterfly. There's also a thought that perhaps the name came from a superstition that in the old days, you couldn't just go to the store and buy butter. You actually had to churn butter in these things called butter churns. And it was pretty hard work. You had to turn and turn and turn and turn. And it's sort of thought that I'm thinking that maybe somebody was turning the thing, didn't think they got enough butter, and that there were some butterflies flying around. And they sort of thought, oh, those butterflies must be witches. They must have stolen the butter. And that maybe that's where this myth came from. But obviously they aren't flies, they aren't witches, and they're not associated with butter. So what exactly are they? Well, all life is classified according to a certain hierarchy made by this Swedish biologist named Carl Linnaeus. And it's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And everything on the planet that's alive is categorized in this hierarchical listing. And it's sometimes hard to remember that in order. So I have to have a mnemonic, my old brain. And I remember King Philip came over for German sausage. And the first letter of each of those kind of corresponds. So it's a way to remember this. And so you can probably, what are you? Can you fill in any of these blanks? And if we were live, we would do this live. But if you want to put it in the chat, if you can answer any of these, which one you're in. And but you are obviously in the kingdom animals. You're not a plant. You're not a fungus. And you're in the phylum that has a spinal cord, a spinal column that gives you rigidity. You're in a mammal class because you have hair and the females have breasts and give milk. You're in the order primates. You're a hominidae family. And you probably know this one, you're a Homo sapien. But butterflies are also in the same hierarchical classification. They, like us, are animals. But their phylum, instead of having a spinal cord that gives them rigidity, they have a rigid exoskeleton that's made out of chitin. And they're in a class, not the mammal class, but they're in the insect class. Well, what is an insect? An insect is a pretty simple organism. It has 3 body parts, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And kind of 3 times 2, it has 6 legs. And that's how you know that a spider is not an insect, because a spider has, 8 legs. But insects have 6 legs. Most of them have a pair of antennae and then 1 or 2 pairs of wings. And that's what makes an insect an insect. And so butterflies are in this insect class, but they're in an order, and the order that they're in is called Lepidoptera. And Lepidoptera means scaly wings. And so it looks like these sort of overlapping scales that sort of look like the shingles on my garage. And these scales give butterflies this enormous beauty. And I think all of us are sort of fascinated by just how varied they are and how beautiful they are. And we're not the only ones to appreciate it. This was a picture that was taken by a wildlife biologist in gorilla in the center of Africa. And he called this picture, "Behold the face of bliss." And he describes seeing this gorilla sort of walking through the woods. All of a sudden, all these butterflies come by, and the gorilla just stops in his tracks and seems like he's sort of in awe of seeing the beauty of the butterflies. Many of you have probably seen this card that also sort of implies the grizzly bears like butterflies. But I think we're all attracted to the color and the beauty of them. These scales are actually modified hairs. And the scales are not just on the wings. They're all over the body. They're over the head, the thorax, the abdomen, and the legs. And the color that we see is not only due to pigment, but it's also due to the structural architecture, the way that light hits their architecture. The most common pigment is in butterflies around the world is black, and that's very good in Alaska because black absorbs heat, and these things need heat. But this order Lepidoptera has not only the butterflies, it also has moths, and it is a huge class of animals. The Lepidoptera has 180,000 species worldwide. That's more than all the species of mammals and birds and reptiles and fish combined. Of those 180,000, 160, or about 90% of them are actually moths. It's only 10% of the Lepidoptera class that is actually butterflies. So moths outnumber the butterflies 9-1. But I think it is important to sort of be able to tell the difference between butterfly and moth. And actually, the person who taught me this was Carol Lloyd. And there are exceptions to any rule, but the general rule is this, that butterflies usually have knobs at the end of a straight antenna, where moths have more of a feathery sort of antenna. And the moth antennas are sort of amazing. When you look at, they look at something from outer space, the featheriness of these moth antennas and their variety. Moths are typically dull colored and kind of have a very thick body. And when they rest, their wings are horizontal to the ground. Butterflies, alternatively, are usually brighter colored. They have a thinner body and they rest with their wings more upright, is more classic. It is thought that butterflies actually evolved from moths. That butterflies, in a sense, are just day-flying moths. And why did they shift from night to day? It is thought that bats evolved and that bats were eating the moths that were flying around at night. And then through evolution, a certain group of them sort of became day flyers when there was left bats and evolved into butterflies. So that's kind of what is a butterfly. And I now want to move on to metamorphosis, the forced life forms of this animal. And it is a miracle. And there's a lot of new science discoveries that have come out that it kind of tells us how this miracle of metamorphosis occurs. There's a lot of recent literature, 2 excellent books published last year, The Language of Butterflies and Butterflies, Their Natural History and Diversity, talk a lot about the new science of what's been found. The word metamorphosis comes from a Greek word meaning to transform. Its definition is that it's a transition in the overall body form that occurs during life. Metamorphosis has fascinated humans for a long time. In ancient literature, Ovid wrote a book called The Metamorphosis. It's a 250 myths on transformation, 12,000 lines done at the time of Christ. It is also in mythology. There's a mythology of god Apollo chasing Daphne to do not good things. And Daphne didn't like the idea. And so she turned into a tree. And so this artist and this sculpture, Daphne turning into a tree, this metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is also in folktales. I think everyone knows the folktales about Prince that is a frog. And when he's kissed by the right princess, he transforms into a handsome human. But the transformation can kind of go the other way. There's kind of this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde metamorphosis, where you can have a guy that's pretty nice during the day, but at night he gets these canines and these claws and becomes a werewolf. So again, transformation. There's more recent literature where metamorphosis, Hans Kafka wrote a book called Metamorphosis, where a human transforms into the cockroach. Not the way I want to go. And a 21st century cartoon, it says, as Jennifer Farkas awoke one morning from a night of compulsive texting, she found herself transformed in her bed into a giant iPhone. So, it's not good to spend too much time with your iPhone. But do we, as humans, human Homo sapiens, do we undergo metamorphosis? No, we don't. We change size, but we don't change form. We also change proportion. If you look into a crib at a baby has a really big head relative to the size of its body. And as we go into, go along in our age, our head becomes proportionally smaller to our body size, but it makes you look into the crib and go dada goo goo and see this beautiful big eyes and this big smile coming from the baby. But as our proportions change and we grow up, but we don't change in overall form. But we are in the minority because most of the species on the planet undergo metamorphosis. We're in the minority. And that is because 94% of the known species on the planet are insects. And 88% of insects undergo 4 complete stages of metamorphosis. I listed all those. It includes mosquitoes and dragonflies, our state insect, and a lot of other things. But metamorphosis doesn't just happen in insects. It also happens in sponges, jellyfish, flatworms, mollusks, segmented worms. So 17 different phylum undergo metamorphosis. A common one that you know is about frogs and toads going from eggs to tadpoles into an adult form, and salmon that come up our Eagle River that start as eggs and then go into these other forms, eventually coming back as salmon from the ocean. But today's talk, obviously, I'm going to talk about metamorphosis in butterflies and some of the recent findings. So stage 1 of metamorphosis is the egg. A fertilized female lays an egg on a leaf. She can lay 1 egg or she can lay a clutch of eggs, and she picks the right leaf. She picks the plant that the butterfly, that the caterpillar is going to want to eat. She can lay between 20 and 1,000 eggs, but only 1% of those eggs are going to survive to become a caterpillar. And the mortality of those 99% of all the eggs that she lays is going to be eaten by birds. They're going to have infection from viruses, bacteria, fungus. Hopefully they don't get COVID. Parasitic wasps lay their young inside the caterpillar, and the young eat the caterpillar. So kind of tough. But 1% does move on from stage 1 to stage 2, moves into the caterpillar stage, which is also called the larval stage. And what happens when a caterpillar breaks out of the egg, kind of looks like this in a cartoon, the first thing that the caterpillar does is it eats its own egg. This is actually a picture on the lower of a caterpillar coming out of an egg. And the top picture is a picture of a monarch caterpillar eating its first meal, the actual shell that it came out of. But this is only the beginning of eating, because caterpillars' main goal in life is to eat. The word caterpillar is derived from a word that means hairy cat. Now, my hair maybe makes me warm a little bit and gives me hopefully a cosmetic function, but my hair just kind of sits there. But the hairs on these things taste, smell, they detect touch, sound, vibration. So they almost work like a sensory organ, doing a variety of senses. Not all of them are quite so hairy, and they come in many shapes and colors. But caterpillars are eating machines, and that's their goal in life, because when they eat, they get bigger and bigger. And as they grow, they actually burst through their skin 5 different times for most of them. So they start off where 1 millimeter, it kind of is like, a third of the animal. And by the end, a 1 millimeter is hardly anything. They do this 5 times, or 5 end stars, where they actually get so big, they burst out of their skin, they keep eating, burst out of that skin, and they do that 5 times. They increase their weight 3,000 times within a day. Now, this morning when I stepped on the scale, I weighed 143 pounds. If I gained that amount, I would weigh 429 pounds. Now, I have gained a little weight in COVID, but, nothing quite this bad. And human cartoons, look, I still fit into my old caterpillar skin. Well, maybe you can fit into your military thing or your prom dress, but it's a joke. The caterpillar cannot go backwards. It's a one-way movement, getting bigger and bigger and eating and eating. It stays a caterpillar for a variety of duration, and it depends on the adequacy of its nutrition. If it's eating predominantly a meat source or kind of carnivorous, it gets a lot of nitrogen, and it only stays as a caterpillar for 3 weeks. If it eats flowers or fruit, maybe 4 weeks. Leaves, a little bit less nutritious, it stays as a caterpillar for 8 weeks. It eats grass, which is even less nutritious, 3 months. And there are times in cold climates with short growing season that they can stay as a caterpillar for 2 to 3 years. I'm going to talk about diapause, which is this process, in a bit. Ram Dass, sort of speaking metaphorically, said, it's only when caterpillarness is done that one becomes a butterfly. That, again, is part of this paradox. You cannot rip away caterpillarness. The whole trip occurs in an unfolding process of which we have no control. But what does control the timing of when a caterpillar moves to the next stage of a chrysalis? And there's been recent scientific discoveries of something called juvenile hormone. And what juvenile hormone does is it basically doesn't let the caterpillar become a butterfly. It says, stay a caterpillar, don't go into the chrysalis to become a butterfly yet. But as the caterpillar gets bigger and bigger and goes through these 5 different end stars, the level of juvenile hormone gets less and less and finally goes to 0. And so it is when the juvenile hormones hits 0 that it's time for the caterpillar to make a chrysalis and go into the 3rd stage of metamorphosis. This transition into the chrysalis is that once it's big enough, a caterpillar finds a safe spot and attaches itself to a leaf or a stick with silk. A final molt reveals the shell called a chrysalis. Inside, the insect is going to change into a butterfly. Kind of as a side note, do you call it a chrysalis or a cocoon? And technically, if you're sort of a splitter rather than a lumper, butterflies, this is called a chrysalis. Moths are called a cocoon. And the difference is that a moth cocoon is made out of silk, the casing. A butterfly chrysalis is a hard skin that appears when the caterpillar sheds its last skin. It attaches to the leaf or the stick with silk, but it's not made out of silk. And that's technically the difference between a cocoon and chrysalis, sort of a small point, but I thought I'd throw it out there. But once this juvenile hormone hits 0, metamorphosis continues and the butterfly moves into the chrysalis stage. And it stays inside this chrysalis for a variety of time, from as short as 10 days to 5 to 7 years inside the chrysalis, maybe waiting for the drought to end or better warmth. And again, we'll talk about diapause a bit later. Another human cartoon, it's kind of a butterfly parents looking at kind of a not so ambitious caterpillar saying, I can change him. Dolores, he has to want to change. But how does a caterpillar become a butterfly inside the chrysalis? Does it dissolve into a soup in the chrysalis, or what else happens in there? And again, and I remember when I was a child, I was told that it becomes a big soup, that if you cut into a chrysalis, all this juice just falls out, and that's it. But modern science has shown that it's a little bit, it's not a soup, it's rather time genetic programming. And the genes tell some parts within the chrysalis to grow, and the genes tell other parts to dissolve and die. So this is an image from National Geographic, and I'm going to zoom in on this image a little bit. And so basically, this organism inside the chrysalis doesn't need caterpillar parts anymore. The silk gland has been used. It has tied itself to a leaf or a branch, and so the silk gland goes away. It dies, it atrophies. It no longer needs to crawl around eating all the time. It doesn't need prolegs. And so the prolegs undergo cell death and atrophy. The genetics turn off basically being a caterpillar. Another image from National Geographic, here as we zero in, the parts that are needed now are the butterfly parts to expand. And so what happens is the stubby prolegs that were the caterpillar degenerate, and the thoracic legs of the butterfly develop. The wings, which are in imaginal discs, start to grow rapidly, and their patterns and colors are predetermined. More butterfly parts grow and expand. The mouth changes. The caterpillar had a mandible or a jaw that was chewing, but that's not going to be the butterfly's way of taking in nutrition. And so basically the mandible gets deformed or changed into the proboscis. And we'll talk about that in a bit. The eye, which was just a simple eye to detect light, recesses in, and instead a very complex eye develops, a compound eye with true vision. And antennae, which weren't present on the butterfly, on the caterpillar, suddenly develop. And suddenly the proboscis, or this drinking tube, develops. And so basically, what goes on inside the chrysalis is that the unneeded parts, the butterfly parts, are dissolved by enzymes and atrophy and die. For example, the silk gland, the mandible, the simple eye, the butterfly parts, which have been sitting there, genetically get turned on and all of a sudden the butterfly parts grow. So it's a lot more than just a soup. It's sort of time genetic programming is what is causing this. And how did they figure this all out? Well, the only way in the old days to study a chrysalis was to cut it open or to do x-rays, and that killed it. And so not a great way to study life. But then there's now micro CAT scans, and they've revealed incredible detail within what's happening inside the chrysalis. And so the trachea expands, it develops a trachea and ability to take in oxygen. The gut shrinks to adjust to a new change in diet, going from leaves to nectar. And so these are images of what the CAT scan sees. On the far left is what the caterpillar looks like, but the stomach changes. It shrinks and it becomes a midgut. And all of a sudden, a system of taking in air through a trachea and air sacs that's going to expand the butterfly's wings develops. These are CAT scan images, drawings of CAT scan images. So it's not actually a matter of wanting to change as in that cartoon, but rather it's genetics acting at the right time through hormones and enzymes. It's a matter of causing unneeded caterpillar parts like the mandible to shrink and die, while the needed butterfly parts like the antenna and wings enlarge. And finally, it's time for the butterfly to come out of the chrysalis. And it takes about an hour to 2 hours for the butterfly to emerge from the chrysalis. It does this by sucking in air, and by taking in air, it breaks the chrysalis open. It then flaps its wings for several hours to dry, to circulate blood, and then it flies off to find a mate. So when it hangs down, the legs come out first, and then it hangs downward so that gravity brings liquid in and fills up the wings. During this time, it's very vulnerable because obviously a bird flying by can see this thing, it can't fly. So during that 2 hours, it'd be easy to pick off a butterfly just emerging, but it's changed form. So another human cartoon, if you get pulled over by a policeman and they check your driver's license, that's an old photo. But so that's the 4 stages of metamorphosis, going from an egg to a caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly, and some of the new science that I think has kind of brought this miracle into some sort of understanding. Now, the butterfly form we talked about has a new obsession. The caterpillar obsession was to eat. The butterfly's obsession is to mate and lay eggs. And the male and female, here seen breeding, find each other by their sense of smell. And then the fertilized female then lays her egg. So we're sort of back where we started. But what's interesting is that the butterfly brain has changed a lot. It's rewired. But what is retained in that brain is the olfactory memory of what it was laid on when it was just in the caterpillar stage, so that she knows where to lay her eggs so that the leaf that the eggs are on will be something that they'll want to eat. And so this memory is still there. So she lays her eggs very specifically. Butterflies do eat, but unlike caterpillars, they don't have to grow. They have a very different gastrointestinal tract that isn't oriented toward leaves, but they have more food options. They can eat nectar, but also mud, dirt, sap, dew, animal droppings, rotting fruit, and even dead animals carrion. So how did the butterflies find this nectar, this carbohydrate? They don't have noses. But it turns out they have these little things kind of near their antenna called pulps, P-A-L-P-S. And these things, there's smell and taste receptors on their feet, on these pulps, and on the antenna. And that's how they find the nectar. Once they find the nectar, how do they take it in? Well, they have something called a proboscis. And we saw that grow inside the chrysalis. And it's really cool. It kind of rolls up like this. So when they're flying around, you don't see the proboscis, but then when they eat this thing, you should see there at a 90-degree angle, and it's sort of interesting. And recent science, it was thought that this was sort of a straw and that the butterfly sucks it up, sucks the nectar up, but it's been found now that it's actually by capillary action. It's the same process where if you put a corner of a washcloth in a tub of water, by morning, the entire washcloth would be wet. It's not because the washcloth sucked the water up, but it's just the properties, the bipolar process of water that's going to suck the water up. And so that's kind of how the proboscis works. Now, electron microscopy has shown that the butterfly proboscis has actually nerve endings that can taste possible food. But the butterfly wants the nectar. The flower wants the butterfly to carry pollen away to fertilize flowers. So there's been this coevolution of the shape of flowers and the shape of the butterfly proboscis to serve their mutualism function. Charles Darwin, a pretty smart guy, once saw a Madagascar flower that had nectar buried deep inside the flower. And he postulated that someday they're going to find the pollinator, and that pollinator is going to have a really long proboscis to get down into this deep nectar site. Years and years later, they saw that this moth, they had this very long proboscis, was indeed the pollinator of this Madagascar flower, as Darwin predicted. But that's a walkthrough kind of the 4 stages of metamorphosis. I know that's kind of fast, but I think it's kind of fascinating recent science. The whole thing can be really fast. It can take about 2 months. And so a butterfly, a monarch butterfly life cycle, kind of a butterfly that's studied an awful lot. We don't have it in Alaska, but it's kind of the butterfly species it seems that we know a lot about. Can only live sometimes for 20 to 35 days. And so the whole thing can happen in just a few months, although we talked about this sometimes, some of these stages can last really long, but so if there's no diapause. But Maya Angelou, the Afro-American poet, wrote, she's now passed away, we delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. Well, why go through all that? Why go through metamorphosis? Why do half the species on the planet have such a complex life thing? And Bert Heinrich had an article in Natural History magazine, and he said that what happens is it allows different forms of life to exist in the same environment without competing for food or mates. So while the caterpillar is eating leaves, the butterfly is eating nectar. So you have different life forms not competing in quite the same niche. But in the past, what did people think? And now that we know a little bit more about metamorphosis, what have people thought about metamorphosis over time? For much of history, people believed that animals came from non-living sources, also known as spontaneous generation. In the Middle Ages, it was thought that you could take some dirty shirts, add some wheat, wait 21 days, and voila, you would have mice. Okay, well, hopefully not, because if I leave some dirty shirts around, I hope no mice come falling out. And even William Shakespeare, he thought that crocodiles came from the mud of the Nile River. So an inanimate mud could create life form. And even Johannes Kepler, a pretty smart guy, right? He figured out that planets were in elliptical rather than circular orbit, but he thought that caterpillars came from the sweat of trees. So people just didn't know where did butterflies come from? Where did these caterpillars come from? And so who was the first person to discover the true mystery of caterpillars and butterfly? Was it some well-financed male scientist doing experiments in a laboratory? No, it was an unmarried single woman artist. She had no sponsor. She self-financed a trip to South America, and she went there with her daughter. And her goal was to try to figure this out. And a woman that I don't think anybody's heard about, that everybody should hear about, I think, and why I'm doing this, is a woman named Maria Merian, because she is this woman artist that figured out metamorphosis. And her father was a book publisher, and at a very young age, she had she was interested in nature, and she was a great artist. And so she went to South America, and she spent hours and hours observing species as they went through metamorphosis. And then she started to do these detailed drawings of the plants they were on, what the caterpillar looked like in different instars, and what the butterflies looked like. What plant was the eggs on? What plant does the caterpillar eat? And all these things. And then she drew these elaborate, beautiful pictures. So she spent this time in South America alone, self-financed with her daughter, single mother. And then she went back to Europe, and in 1705 published a book and that blew people away. Because it had figured out metamorphosis, it was also these absolutely gorgeous drawings. And that's the history of metamorphosis. So I can't really talk about metamorphosis without mentioning this woman's name. But moving on, I'd like to now move to talk about some of the few survival strategies of butterflies, because there is a lot of things that want to eat butterflies. They want to eat the eggs, the caterpillars. We talked about only 1% of the eggs survive. The chrysalis gets eaten. The butterfly gets eaten. And so how do they survive? And so some of them blend in. The goal is to sort of don't get seen. The philosophy on some of the other ones is, well, let's be seen. Show your colors, taste really bad. And so the predator wants to avoid eating you. So these are the blend in approach. And you can see a caterpillar on the left that looks an awful lot like a leaf and more of a dead leaf, a butterfly that looks a lot like that. And here's a chrysalis that you kind of might pass by and not realize that that wasn't just a dead leaf hanging down. And they also blend in by having, if the butterfly is open, you see a lot of color, but lots of times when the butterfly has their wings up and is closed, it blends in with the environment. So it's another way that it can, if it gets scared, I don't know if you've done butterfly photography, but if you scare them, all of a sudden they close their wings and your shot is gone. Trust me, I've had this experience. The other approach is to sort of be seen, show your stuff. Look like a snake so that they avoid you. So if you're a bird flying towards this thing, you want to eat it, and all of a sudden you go, blah, I don't think so. And if you just think this is an image from South America and this only happens in the rainforest, our Samantha, our Zoom queen here today, took this picture at Eagle River Nature Center. It was nice enough to share the image with me. Thank you, Samantha. And so I think Carol Lloyd would be very proud that 2 generations after her as a naturalist, this naturalist was out there taking pictures of butterfly caterpillars. I'm sure Carol Lloyd is smiling. But the other approach is to avoid predation by tasting really bad. And some butterflies eat plants that have toxins in them. They apparently are not toxic to the caterpillar, but when other predators try to eat them, it tastes really bad. For example, the milkweed that the monarch butterflies, is their sole food, has cardiac glycosides and causes predators to have nausea and vomiting. So the monarch butterfly lays her eggs on milkweed, then the caterpillars eat the milkweed, and this toxin gets into the caterpillar and then also later the developing butterfly. So you can see this blue jay that says, oh, I'm going to eat this caterpillar or this monarch butterfly, and goes, blah, it's awful, and kind of upchucks it. And the next time it's going to see this thing, and they're very colorful, right? It goes, oh, I remember those things. Those things taste awful. I'm not going to touch those guys. And so, and the butterfly mother seems to know which eggs to lay the milkweed, because it's going to protect both the caterpillar and the future butterflies that are going to develop from that. So the mother, by remembering which plant to lay on, is important. We don't have monarchs in Alaska because we don't have any milkweed. But butterflies also have to survive winter. And so more than just predators. Now, some butterflies in the outside of Alaska migrate to warmer places, sort of like Alaskans going to Hawaii. And the monarch butterflies sort of has this amazing migration that they head down to a place in Mexico, except the one on the West Coast sort of head to the coast there. And you can see them actually if you go to places like Monterey or Pacific Grove in the eucalyptus trees, pretty cool. And then so they make this huge thing. And then in spring, they come back into North America, into the United States, continental United States. And what's really cool about it, it's not just one butterfly that makes that whole trip, it's 5 generations. So it is actually the great-great-grandchildren of the butterfly that left Maine that finally gets back to Maine. And so it's a pretty amazing story. And there's another amazing one that kind of even outdoes the monarch. There's something called the painted lady, and that goes from Europe all the way into sub-Saharan Africa. And it's been, they've figured out that it's going to go 25,000 miles in a week. That same butterfly exists in Canada and does migrate to Mexico. So it's the other migrators. But Alaskan butterflies don't migrate outside. They have to stay here just like we did and survive this winter. And most things that hibernate for the winter stay above freezing. Bears drop their temperature, 5 degrees Celsius. Arctic ground squirrels, pretty amazing, drop theirs 30 degrees Celsius, but they stay well above freezing. But butterfly forms, all the forms are tolerate actually going below 32 degrees or 0 Celsius. And they do it by freeze tolerance and freeze avoidance. And this is pretty complex, to be honest, but I can kind of summarize that they have things like sort of antifreeze in their body that let them go to less than 32 and not freeze. And then they have mechanisms within themselves that prevent themselves from forming damaging ice crystals. And so they actually go into the freezing. And then one last survival strategy that I'll mention is diapause. I've sort of mentioned it as we went along, that sometimes caterpillars stay in the same as a caterpillar for 2 to 3 years, and some chrysalises stay in there for 5 to 7 years. And so the butterflies can, if the environmental conditions are bad, sort of just stop changing. So humans grow up, but once we start, we couldn't stop the clock. But butterflies can actually, in all their forms, can go into diapause. So eggs, caterpillars, chrysalis, butterflies can basically just stop. And what diapause is a temporary dormant stage in which the growth and development of the organisms stops. It can occur any time of the year. It's not just hibernation like winter. It can any season. It's common in insects, and it can happen in all 4 stages of metamorphosis. It allows survival in winter, or if the conditions are really poor, such as like drought. And it's thought to be controlled by hormones, genetics, and indirectly by environmental conditions. And people are sort of interested in diapause and hibernation because, one of NASA's goals by the year 2100 is to get a human to Mars. But the question is, how are you going to get somebody to Mars and have enough food and water on board? Well, what happens if you could put a human into hibernation or into diapause and sort of stop them in their tracks, stop the clock, so they wouldn't have to eat and drink so much, and then let them kind of wake up once they get to Mars? And so this is kind of, of interest to people. So diapause it has interest to people right now in science. But I want to move on from these survival mechanisms into a few butterflies that you may be able to see when the 8 feet of snow melts and it gets to above freezing, which we set record low temperatures all time last week, 4 separate days. Anyway, but the butterflies are going to be coming. And so I want to show you a few of them. These are the ones you're likely to see. So there's 80 different species of butterflies in 5 different families here in Alaska. Well, I used to live in Wisconsin. My mother sort of had a contest with which kid could see the first robin, and that was the sign of spring. And I know everybody kind of put spring in the chat, and I guess it's different places, but we always were, my mother would say, "Oh, I saw a robin today," and she would kind of win the contest. But how about marking the start of spring in Alaska with the first butterfly you see? What is the earliest butterfly species that you're likely to see in South Central Alaska, and when could you see it? Well, this is a book, it's actually a pamphlet or a booklet called Butterflies of Alaska. There was a man named Dr. Phillip who got people really interested in butterflies, including Carol Lloyd. And after he passed away, he had a great butterfly collection and all this knowledge. And so people from the university, Derek Sykes and Clifford Ferris and a bunch of people said, we're going to put together the Butterflies of Alaska book, sort of after Dr. Phillip died. And this is an amazing book. The second edition has pictures of all 80 Alaskan butterflies. It has range maps, their habitat, field notes, and also their hibernation form. And this very interesting table, which you look at the back of the book, and it tells you what butterfly you're likely to see when. And so if you zoom into the top of this, you can see that at the top, he has across here the months. So, end of February, end of March, end of April, going across the top here. And then this rust line tells you when you're likely to see that butterfly. So if you look up on the range maps of what butterflies in South Central Alaska and when they're likely to fly, you can actually come up with what butterfly you're most likely to see. And the one you're most likely to see is something called the Morning Cloak. And they can be seen as early as mid-March. Now, and I hope to gosh, no butterfly came out in mid-March this year, but I haven't seen one yet, but I'm awaiting to see it. And the reason that it can do this is it overwinters as the adult butterfly. That's its form that it hibernates here in Alaska. It's already a butterfly at the end of fall, and then it survives all through what we've all endured and then comes out. And I used to think that morning cloak was like morning and evening. But it turns out that like if a husband died and the widow wore clothes to show people that she was mourning, and so she wore a certain outfit, and it turned out that this outfit had a lot of sort of brown on it and had kind of color at the bottom. So people thought that it looked like a mourning cloak for somebody in mourning. And that's how this butterfly got its name. But there are different families. There's the Swallowtail family, and the Morning Cloak is in that family. And it's the, I'm not sure I'll pronounce these good, but the Pallinidae. And it's characterized by these appendages that kind of stick out on the hind wings that stick out. And out of the 80 butterflies in Alaska, 5 are in that family. And this is one you commonly see in South Central is the Canadian swallowtail. It's the largest Alaskan butterfly. It lives at low altitudes in woodlands, so a great one to see at Eagle River Nature Center. Notice that the center of its body is predominantly yellow. Now, this butterfly overwinters as a chrysalis and then comes out to the butterfly. So one you're likely not see quite as early as the Morning Cloak, which overwinters as in the form of a butterfly. Another butterfly that looks kind of like it, also swallowtail, has these extensions on the wing, is the Old World swallowtail. Notice that this butterfly, however, instead of having yellow near the body, has black. So it's the way that you differentiate. It's also the habitat. It likes mountain meadows and ridges. It also overwinters as in the chrysalis form. The next 2 butterflies that I'm going to show you are in the brush-footed or Nymphalidae, and 45 out of the 80 butterflies in Alaska are in this class. And it's named because the legs are covered with hair that led to the name brush-footed. The front pair of legs are very reduced in size and are not used for walking. So it looks like it has 4 legs, though like all insects, it does have 6 legs, but 2 of them are kind of miniaturized on these brush-footed ones. And the one that you'll commonly see is the Milbert's tortoiseshell. And this hibernates as an adult. And what I love about this one is that it only eats nettles. And so I let my nettles grow, and I watch for these things. And so the nettles, and so you can watch the different caterpillars and instars. And it's been really fun to watch because just like the monarchs only eat milkweed, the Milbert's tortoiseshell only eats nettles. So kind of one of my favorite, and I think they're very pretty too. The third family is Lycinidae, or Gossamer winged, and Gossamer refers that the wings can look kind of sheer. It includes ones that are called coppers, elfins, and blues. That's what Nibokov was an expert of, and they often appear as like tiny flashes in the sun. Pretty one that we oftentimes see in South Central Alaska is the Alaskan blue. This hibernates as an egg, so it has to then go through the whole deal before it becomes a butterfly. The males puddle in large numbers. In other words, they like to go to like mud puddles and sort of hang out there. They like kind of open areas. The next family is the Piridae that has 14 of the 80 and includes the sulfurs and whites. They're usually pale yellow or white. They're small to medium in size, and they hibernate as a caterpillar. So those are kind of ones you likely to see in Alaska. And the last one are the skippers. They get their name because they skip from flower to flower. So if you try to photograph these things, good luck, because they're hard to keep up with. But they're kind of, some people don't count this family as butterflies. They're kind of like a cross between a butterfly and a moth. They have these thicker bodies that are moth-like. And instead of having antennas with knobs, they have sort of hooks at the end, and they're sort of drab colored. For example, this is a skipper antenna. Now, we saw the antenna of butterflies straight with knobs, the feathery ones of the moths, but here, this sort of hook-like skipper look. And this is the Arctic skipper. Again, with this very thick body. It has a moth-like look, more drab colors. It hibernates as a caterpillar. If you're interested in learning about Alaska butterflies, you can't, this is an amazing booklet. And another one that is waterproof plastic that you can kind of throw in your backpack. This actually doesn't have all the 80 butterflies, but it has a bunch of them. And it has them by family. It even has some pictures of caterpillars. It even has a few pictures of chrysalises if you want to try to identify them. It does have a little information. It says that the painted lady is here in Alaska. And the butterfly book does not include, the painted ladies have been seen here but they're more of a Canadian species, maybe blown here, brought in by cars or something. So they don't really count. But anyway, but this book that has Painted Lady is an Alaska butterfly. But anyway, but still a nice thing, and it's small, cheap, and carry it around. There are some great websites on Alaska butterflies. Turtle Puddle has a great collection of pictures and some information. And the Alaska Center for Conservation Science keeps a current list of butterflies and the current nomenclature, which keeps changing. So if you look at Carol Lloyd's list, it's going to have some old names on it, not the common names, but the scientific names are changing because genetics and numerology is being found about genetics. But if you want a current list of current nomenclature, they have a list of all the butterflies. So that's kind of a few Alaskan butterflies and how you can help butterflies. Well, butterflies are in trouble. You probably have heard about bees being in trouble. Well, insects are kind of in trouble, but butterflies are too. It's probably due to habitat destruction and alteration, but also pesticides, the ubiquitous use of pesticides, and probably global warming. And so what do butterflies need? What can you do to help them live and thrive? They need caterpillar food. So, I don't cut my nettles. I just sort of walk around them, try not to get stuck by them. They need nectar sources, and they like landing pads. So they love like dandelions. I know dandelions are an invasive species, but we don't cut our dandelions. So we have kind of a chaos here of dandelions, but it really, you see a lot of butterflies and certain plants they really are attracted to. They like moist soil or mud for this process called puddling to get minerals. And so you can create that by just taking like a trash can lid, putting it upside down, burying it in the ground, putting some mud in there, and maybe putting some water in there. They like rocks and bare soil for basking because they can get warmth. And they can't fly unless they're a certain temperature, so they have to warm up in the morning. But if you have little rocks that they can bask on, that will help. And then finally, shelter if it's a lot of wind. So trees and some crevices and some bushes are helpful. If you're really interested in this and wanting to do gardening for butterflies, the Xerces Society that tries to preserve invertebrates has a website and a book on gardening for butterflies, and the North American Butterfly Association website also has some really useful information. Again, basking rocks, that they're cold-blooded insects, they absorb heat from the surroundings, and a basking rock can help in the process. And then lastly, avoid pesticides. If you can be find biologic ways of controlling things. So that's kind of the outline for my talk. I know there was a lot of information presented fairly fast, but I hope that you're fascinated by the recent science. And I hope that when Nabokov said it is astounding how little the ordinary person notices butterflies. I hope that this talk has helped you to notice and appreciate butterflies like Carol Lloyd did. Thank you for your attention. Maybe Samantha has a chat or questions. And if anybody here is a butterfly expert, I'm certainly not, and can answer some of these tougher questions, please jump in.
So excellent. Just like Beth said, if you have questions, pop them in the chat. And I'm just going to start kind of going through them. Beth, I think you are in a really good place to answer this, and you are welcome to plug another organization you're a part of. But first question is, encroaching invasive species like bird vetch, how does that affect the butterfly population?
Yeah, and so I'm a member of the Native Plants Society, and I think we don't want to plant invasive species. And so even if you're butterfly gardening, you don't want to, the butterflies here evolved for our native habitat. And so you want to avoid planting there's some butterfly plants in the lower 48 that are good nectar slings that you wouldn't want to introduce to Alaska. And bird vetch is one of those things that I think people, it's kind of a bad one on the invasive species thing. So I think you'd want to avoid that.
Yeah, because it can basically choke out the good food for the butterflies, and it outcompetes their host plants, right?
Exactly.
Right. And hi, I'm Greta. I just want to say that I'm a gardener, and I notice that when I have more of the local plants like the fireweeds and even some like branching of the white fireweed to the all that I get a ton of butterflies who love that. And when I plant local stuff, the butterflies come. So I think we should concentrate on what grows in our area as opposed to what we would love to have, you know?
Yeah, they evolved for native plants, and I think to do native plants is certainly the way I would go also.
Absolutely.
Comment, thank you.
And
Yeah,
so too.
And if other people have plants that they have been very successful with attracting butterflies, please throw them into the chat or mention them, because we also have fireweed that's very effective here, though we never cut our fireweed.
Yeah. And we are super fortunate. You are all part of our official largest Zoom lecture yet, with 78 people. And so just to make sure that, or we had 78 people at the peak. And so as we go, I'm going to ask that we use the chat box so that we're not talking over each other and so that everybody's question can be addressed. But with that, there was a question early on about do butterflies communicate with each other? Do they broadcast the location of their food likes, kind of like bees, and are they social that way?
I think the answer to that is no. They're not really a social insect in the way that, butterflies and wasps are, in the way that bees and like wasps are. They don't. So I think the answer to that is no. It's a good question.
Right. Another great question is, do you know what part of the caterpillar becomes the wings? Is it like the hairs?
They have what's called imaginal discs, is the part that I've seen, and these imaginal discs inside the chrysalis become the wings. So I think it's they're not hairs, but there's some predetermined structure that's then going to activate. But imaginal discs is what I've seen them called.
Nice. Do you happen to know when the second edition of Butterflies of Alaska came out?
Yes, it's. I've got a copy right here, and I think they say it was the copyright is 2016. The first printing was March of 2016. It says, and I don't know when the second one came out, but the second one is better in that the first one had some of the butterflies and the descriptions on different pages, and it was kind of hard to tell what writing went with which pictures. But in the second edition, they corrected that. They have all the butterfly pictures on one page, and they have, it's a wonderful book. They have all the range maps on there, and they talk about their biology, their flight. It's just a wonderful book. And it was $30, so it's not cheap, but it's, I don't think they'll be coming out with a new one for a while. So if you can get your hands on the second edition, it's better than the first. And they're selling the second edition at Eagle River Nature Center. I know because Asta gave me a copy.
So in June, come buy this book from us. No. So with your Maya Angelou poem, oops, I just lost the question. What was the name of the poem? And then do you know the name of the artist who discovered the metamorphosis?
Yes. I mean, her name is, and that book is that, Crystal, let me go back here, see if I can do this. Yeah, it's, and what it is was I went to a site that just had a lot of metaphoric stuff on, and I found that Maya Angelou. So I don't know if that's an actual full part of a full poem or not. And the woman who, this woman artist that was really amazing, went to South America on her own, it's Miriam. And that book is very interesting. It's kind of her biography, but that is her name is that going to pop up? Yeah, is Maria Cimbala Miriam, Merian. She fell in love with insects when she was 13. She was a single mother, went to South America, no sponsorship. It was Europe's first single-purpose scientific expedition in the Western Hemisphere. She went to find out about metamorphosis. Unbelievable woman. In 1600s. Wow.
Let's see. How do males find females?
By smell.
Absolutely. And so then that kind of ties into the next question is, do butterflies who are mimics sometimes mistake another species as their own?
I don't think so. There are, the famous one is the Viceroy. And a Viceroy doesn't, doesn't taste, there's different, it doesn't taste so bad, but it's evolved to look like the monarch, so that predators that see the Viceroy go, yeah, I don't think that one's going to taste very good. But I suspect that monarchs and because they know the smell, that a monarch and a Viceroy wouldn't breed. But they do trick predators into thinking the Viceroy looks like a monarch. It's called Batesian mimicry. And it was Bates, a man named Bates, that went to South America and figured out that it was mimicking. It's Batesian mimicry.
Ooh. This is kind of a cool question, or thing is, I rarely see butterflies in Alaska, and I've seen gardening experts suggest that gardeners should kill caterpillars to preserve their flowering plants. How can we combat this attitude, particularly in light of the reduced numbers of butterflies?
Oh, well, I wouldn't kill. I don't. Right. I mean, I guess we're sort of, we garden also, but I guess it's an attitude thing. I guess it's how much are they bothering your crops? But I wouldn't kill caterpillars. I guess I maybe move them maybe to a natural, take them off your vegetable and put them maybe in nature rather than killing them.
Yeah, and I think too, just leading by example might be a good way, and finding ways to brag about the caterpillars that are eating the things that you want. Make them the target, or the goal, the outcome, I think. Might be a good publicity campaign.
Yeah, I think insects get a bad name, that there's all insects are bad. They bite you and they eat, and there's so many beneficial insects. In fact, there's a whole booklet on beneficial insects of Alaska and all the good things they do. And and butterflies are in trouble. So I would support trying to move the butterflies.
Yeah. Don Hunter adds too that people need to be encouraged to plant one for themselves and one for the insects.
Oh, that's a great idea. Good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think so. Another question that comes with that is, so we can pick them up and put them elsewhere safely. And I would say yes if it's the same plant, but Beth, you might have other thoughts.
And I'm sorry, what was the question?
No worries. So as far as moving the caterpillars off of the plants, so it's safe to pick them up and put them elsewhere.
I've never done that, but I think they'd be durable enough, or maybe just break off a leaf and move the leaf somewhere else. Yeah. I've never done that. I don't know gardeners who've done it. We have to ask somebody like Julie Riley or something about that. But I think they're durable enough that you could move them and not kill them.
Yeah, I think that based on the interest in this program, the Nature Center is definitely going to, as we're able to have in-person classes more safely, have a lot more butterfly programming. But in my past, I used to work at a butterfly house, and specifically with children. And as far as touching caterpillars, they are really resilient. But I would say to students who are touching them, like, pet them like you're telling them a secret. So just being firm but gentle, like how you would hold an egg almost, where you don't want to squish them or anything like that, but gently moving them.
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. Yep, that's good. Yeah.
See, are there any new species moving north to Alaska as the climate changes?
It's a great question. I'm not aware of that, but it'd be interesting to watch. It'd be interesting to watch, and the Conservation Center would be the best. Justin Fulkerson would be the person to know, but I've not heard of that.
Yeah. I know this is a question from me. I know that a lot of parents of especially toddler-aged people have reached out talking about wanting to order caterpillars from other sources to watch the process, in particular painted ladies and swallowtails. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I would be reluctant to bring a non-native species here. For example, we don't have monarchs. So if you grew a monarch, there's no milkweed. And painted ladies, it's in the booklet they describe the 80, and then they have painted lady as sort of one that has been seen in Ketchikan and in Southeast, but that it's not really a native species. They think that it comes on storms from Canada or on cars or something like that. So I would be reluctant to bring a non-native species in. But it is fascinating to watch them. I mean, I've been to butterfly places too, in Costa Rica, where they have all these chrysalids. It's just fascinating. But I think I wouldn't bring in a non-native species.
Excellent. Huh. So with that, it looks like the questions are kind of slowing down in the comment box. If you have any further questions, feel free to email me, naturalist@ernc.org, and I can always pass them, the questions off to Beth or help you find the right answers. And so with that, Beth, thank you so much for taking the time today. Thank all of you for joining today. This program will be up on our website hopefully by Wednesday underneath the archived programs tab if you want to revisit it. And I know, like, I was taking pictures of Beth's book slides going like, oh, here's my summer reading list. And so if you want to revisit any of those titles, I will try to have an accompanying list with this as well. So thank you everyone for taking the time. Thank you, Beth. And what a joy it is to celebrate butterflies and remember Carol Lloyd today.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Samantha. And thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate it.